The box in my hands felt heavier than it should have, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant. A worn leather wallet, a cracked photo frame, a few office keys, and a coffee mug still stained from late nights at work. These were the things my boss had left behind after the accident that changed everything. I stood outside his apartment door that evening, rain dripping from my jacket, my son's small hand gripping my sleeve, and my heart pounding like I was about to step into something I couldn't come back from. Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who keep going even when life feels impossible, please like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel Lonely Dad Strong Heart. Your support keeps these stories alive. Being a single father was never part of the plan. Life rarely asks what we planned anyway. 3 years earlier, I had stood in a hospital hallway holding my newborn son while the world collapsed around me. Since then, every day had been a careful balancing act: diapers, work deadlines, sleepless nights, and the constant fear that I might not be enough for him. My boss had been one of the few people who understood that struggle. He wasn't a man who spoke much about emotions, but he had a quiet way of helping. Sometimes it was letting me leave early to pick up my son from daycare. Sometimes it was pretending not to notice when I looked exhausted during meetings. To most people he was strict and distant, but to me he was something like a lifeline. Then the accident happened. It was sudden, unfair, and the kind of news that spreads through an office like cold air through an open door. One day he was there, walking through the hallway with his usual serious expression, and the next day his desk was empty and silent. HR packed up his belongings quickly, but a few personal items had been left behind in a drawer only I knew about. I had volunteered to return them. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I just didn't want those memories sitting in a cardboard box under fluorescent office lights. The rain had started as we reached his building, a tall gray structure that looked colder than usual that evening. My son, barely 4, leaned against me quietly, clutching his small toy car like it was his only treasure. He didn't fully understand why we were there, but he had learned to trust wherever I took him. Standing in that hallway outside the apartment, I hesitated. Something about the silence made my chest tighten. I wasn't sure who would answer the door or what I would even say. I knocked anyway, feeling the weight of the box shift in my hands. The door opened slowly, and that was the moment everything changed. I had expected maybe a relative, maybe a neighbor helping sort things out. Instead, a little girl stood there, no older than my son, her eyes wide and uncertain, holding the edge of the door like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Behind her, the apartment looked dim and quiet, filled with the kind of silence that happens after someone important is gone. For a second, neither of us moved. My son peeked from behind my leg, curious in that fearless way children are when they sense something unfamiliar but not dangerous. The girl looked at him, then at the box in my hands, and then back at my face as if trying to understand why a stranger had arrived carrying pieces of her world. I gently explained why I had come, my voice softer than I expected, my words careful. The girl stepped aside and let us in. The apartment smelled faintly like coffee and books, exactly the way the office sometimes did when my boss worked late. Seeing his things there, the couch, the scattered papers, the quiet lamp glowing in the corner, made it suddenly real in a way the office never had. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't known before: my boss had been a father too. Life has a strange way of revealing truths when you least expect them. As I placed the box on the table, I noticed photos on the wall, moments frozen in time, birthdays, school events, and quiet smiles that my boss had never shown at work. He had always kept that part of his life hidden. Maybe he thought it made him vulnerable. Maybe he just didn't want people to know he had someone depending on him the same way my son depended on me. The girl walked slowly toward the box, her small hands hovering over the items inside as if touching them might break something fragile. My son watched her with that silent understanding children sometimes have when adults are still trying to catch up emotionally. In that quiet apartment, 2 children who had never met before stood there connected by something they couldn't fully explain yet: loss, change, and the strange way life pushes people together when they need it most. I felt a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with grief alone. It was the realization that behind the stern man who signed my paychecks was someone who had been fighting his own battles, raising a child, probably worrying about the same things that kept me awake at night. The late hours, the tired eyes, the quiet support he had shown me, it all made sense now. The rain outside grew louder, tapping against the windows like a reminder that time was still moving forward whether we were ready or not. Days like that make you question your own strength. Being a single parent already felt like climbing a mountain without knowing where the path ended. Some nights I wondered if my son would look back one day and see me as strong or just tired. I wondered if I was giving him enough stability, enough love, enough hope. Watching that little girl hold her father's mug with both hands, as if it still carried warmth, I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest thing we can give our children isn't perfection, but presence. The visit that was supposed to take 5 minutes stretched longer than I expected. There was no awkwardness anymore, only a quiet understanding that we had stepped into a moment neither of us had planned. My son eventually sat on the floor rolling his toy car slowly across the carpet, and the girl sat nearby watching it move, her eyes softening for the first time since we arrived. For the first time in weeks, the apartment didn't feel completely empty. That night stayed with me long after we left. Walking home through the wet streets, my son's hand wrapped around mine, I felt a shift inside me. The struggles of being a single dad hadn't disappeared, but something about that unexpected moment had reminded me that people carry invisible stories everywhere they go. The man I thought I knew at work had been living a life full of responsibilities and love that he never talked about. And now his daughter was standing at the beginning of a road that looked painfully familiar to me. Over the next weeks, life slowly continued, the way it always does even when your heart wants time to pause. Work felt different without him there. The office seemed quieter, colder. But I found myself thinking about that evening more than I expected. Sometimes the smallest moments change the direction of a life. Being a parent teaches you that strength isn't loud. It's waking up when you're exhausted because your child needs you. It's showing up even when your heart is heavy. It's choosing kindness when the world feels unfair. And sometimes, it's knocking on a door you almost walked away from. Before we reach the ending, I want to ask you something special. If you're still watching and this story is starting to mean something to you, write in the comments, kindness still exists. I read these comments, and they remind me why stories like this matter. Months later, I would look back on that rainy evening as one of those quiet turning points in life, the kind you don't recognize immediately but eventually realize changed how you see the world. I had gone there simply to return a few forgotten items, but what I found instead was a reminder that behind every tired face, every strict boss, every silent stranger, there's a story we don't see. And sometimes, when life feels unbearably heavy, unexpected moments open doors we didn't know we needed. My son squeezed my hand that night as we walked under the streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something stronger than exhaustion. I felt hope. Not the loud kind that comes with big promises, but the quiet kind that grows slowly in your chest and tells you that maybe, just maybe, you're doing better than you think. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Lonely Dad's Strong Heart. Your support helps keep these meaningful stories going, and you never know whose life might be lifted by the next one. Because sometimes all it takes is one unexpected door opening, to remind us that we're not as alone as we thought.